Okay, so the video has already started.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome our viewing audience today to another session of our Ed Talk series. I am Andrea Ferrari, founder and CEO of Whole Schools International, and with my partner, Gabriela Gonzalez Pacheco. Hey, Gabby, Director of Programs. We have created this innovative space where we inspire conversations around education during these unprecedented times. Education is transforming, and for Whole Schools, we believe that equity, happiness, and well-being are the keys to a sustainable change, a change that is future-proof and that can face the consequences, long and short-term consequences. As we gather here, we, together with experts in the fields, leaders in the educational sector, to guide our educational communities through their international perspectives and build this awareness around this movement on well-being. We're here to co-create the new landscape in education, and today we are super honored to have with us Peter Brun. Peter Brun, hello over there.
Hi. It's great to see you both.
Thank you, Peter. Great to have you, Peter. Vice President at the Center for Collaborative Classroom, or CCC. It is an education non-for-profit organization in Alameda, California. And Peter and this organization has been working towards integrating the academic and the social development inside our schools, inside school districts, across the U.S. and internationally as well. He's partnered up with the New EduLite. Hello, New EduLite. We know you're in the audience watching. Super happy and thrilled to have you guys on board. And Peter's often sharing his work through keynotes, presentations at local, state, national, and international conferences. So we're super excited to have insights into his work today. And I'd like to share this about Peter, that before his current work at CCC, he's an alum from my alma mater, Teachers College at Columbia University in New York City. Woohoo! Peter worked over here as a staff developer for the university's Reading and Writing Project, where he began his career teaching in elementary school in the Bronx. So we can read Peter's latest writings on teaching and learning in the Language magazine, the Handbook of Moral and Character Education. And Peter's also the author of this amazing lesson planning handbook published by Scholastic with the essential strategies that inspire student thinking and learning. So with that word essentials, Peter, it brings us to our topic today, essentials on teaching and learning. And of course, we know that now that we're in the virtual, everything is condensed, and it begs that question: what might we, Peter, consider to be essential now, and how do we identify those essential fundamentals?
That's such an important question. And I think it's, also with a level of humbleness that I say the word essentials, because in some ways when someone says, what's essential, it's like we know everything. We are omniscient in some way. And I think, I'm going to certainly talk from my experience, both, our research experience in schools and districts and our long history of working with kids and teachers. But I recognize too, when I want to put this in a little bit of context, because I think, what's essential really needs to also come from the communities we work in, and those communities really dictate, I think, what's essential. And so that's what I just want to layer that on top of this. It is with the sense, I think, as I said, of humbleness that I say this, and I bring sort of my thinking with you all. And I think, one of my colleagues and I, as we thought about even the beginning of this school year, like it was just going to be such a different school year for all of us, filled with tension, with trauma, with fear, and in some places maybe with a little bit of excitement, and all these sort of. It's such a difficult time that we thought, well, what, with our partner schools and districts, what would we say is essential? And we boiled it down to just a few things. And I'll just, in the biggest one isn't any surprise to anyone in the session. It's not certainly, not going to be a surprise to you. And that is the fundamentalness of building relationships. And when I say that, it sounds so simple. It sounds like we've all heard that before. It's, I feel like, it's especially in the last year or two, I think it's really sort of risen both in the sort of public dialogue, but also in the research around what's important for kids. But I say that, and I also know that I think fundamentally it might be one of the hardest things to get right and to do well and to do consistently. Mm-hmm. And that, I think about that because, I say to preface this by saying, if you think about in your own life, relationships are hard when we don't work on them. They're hard when we don't prioritize them. If you think about significant other in your life, think about children, parents, siblings, neighbors, a spouse. When we don't tend to our relations, we don't nurture our relationships, they wither and they go away. And I think that's true for schools. And I think teachers, when we go into teaching, we have so much on our plates. We have so much on our shoulders, especially now, that it would be very easy for us to sort of get to what, some might say the important stuff, the content we have to cover, so we, kids can get to the benchmarks that they need to reach. And I think that what's hard is that when we don't prioritize it, we don't systematize it, we don't have a sort of a thoughtful way in which we're going to nurture it, it becomes catch as catch can. It sort of becomes anecdotal or accidental. And that is never sort of a recipe for good work. And so I just, as a base for all the other stuff we might want to talk about when we talk about what might be essential. I think, relationships sort of sit at the heart of what we want to do for kids and for teachers. And, sometimes teachers ask, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Because people always say relationships. And, I don't know in your experience, when you've seen in schools and districts, but for the teachers that I learn from the most, what I notice is when I say they put a priority into it, they schedule it. They start every day with the morning circle, the morning meeting. They close every day with the closing circle. They take social development seriously. They take social emotional learning seriously. And they recognize the interdependence of it in our academic instruction. And we can get more into this later. But I think, when I think of essentials, I don't know how this rings for the two of you in your work, but I sort of feel like if we're going to talk about anything, that at least in our experience with schools and districts, develop a sense of connectedness is fundamental to student success.
Yeah. Peter, while you were saying this, something kept going through my mind, which is before the pandemic, we already knew that it was very difficult to build relationships. Yeah. No, we knew it was a hard topic. And as you said, it was something that maybe we know we have to prioritize, but not necessarily know how to do it. And then the pandemic hits and it takes it to a whole nother level, because now you have to build relationships through these means that are not created to create connection and to favor that type of relationship building. So it took it to a complete new level. And I think that's a harsh challenge. And I was thinking right now, I was talking to a teacher who was very frustrated. And she was showing me a picture of how her class looked like, and it was only black squares with either a letter or a name. And she was like, I can't even see their faces. I can't even see their eyes and know how they are. So what do you think about, this part where we are right now and how it has taken it there?
I in some ways, I'm not far from Silicon Valley in California, in Northern California. I think a lot of times we hear from the technology folks that, technology might save everything. It's going to save education. It's going to be the new innovation in the 21st century. But I think what we're learning is while technology makes something like this possible, it's amazing. It can be really, really fantastic. And there is the promise of, opening the ways in which curriculum can be enacted with students can be really transformative. But there are some essentials, if you will, that like relationships that make it really hard. The little squares, we all talk about Zoom fatigue. We talk about, I just want to hug somebody. I just want to be in a room with somebody again. My wife teaches second grade, and her students have actually never physically in person seen her smile. She has to have a mask on when she's teaching all day long, and so I think in those schools that are in person, those schools that are virtual, those schools that are hybrid right now, I see teachers working really hard to overcome sort of the distance. But I think the pain that your colleague felt today, as you talked with her, I think is true everywhere. I think most teachers feel this this absence really of connection, both I think from their peers, from their colleagues, and from their students. I wish I had sort of like a magical thing that we could do to sort of make it easier, to make that challenge go away. But I think what it gets at, and I think what the frustration is that we recognize that relationships form the centerpiece of all sorts of really important things. It forms, for instance, the centerpiece of engagement. It forms the centerpiece of trauma-informed practices. It is at the core of culture responsive practices. So the good teaching that teachers want to be doing and need to be doing it's when they feel their best, happens when relationships are at sort of front and center. And I think the pandemic has just made it so hard to do well. But I think that's where intention really matters. I think when someone says, "What am I going to prioritize? What are the things?" There's no way to cover everything in our day anymore. So, but if I take out team building, if I take out time to connect with others, if I take out time for kids to connect with each other, it might take a little longer over Zoom. It might take a little bit out of our school day, the content out of our school day. But I don't think that kids are going to be able to engage in the way we need them to engage, in the way they need to engage if we don't. And so I think that's sort of where a lot of this lies.
To add to what you both are saying, a personal anecdote, I was telling Gabby this morning or last night, I got an email from my child's school. She's in high school, and they were asking us to attend a parent-teacher conference. And so I said, Julia, which of your teachers am I going to meet? Have you made the appointment? She's like, Mommy, why bother? My teachers don't know who I am. My teachers have never seen my face. And you're talking about a high schooler who shares at least 10 to 12 teachers. But you're looking at, we're in February, Peter. I mean, hello. It's not even, it's been already, the first semester's gone by. You would think that effort that you were just talking about to make a connection, to build that rapport, to make the students feel like they belong. And I think that piece of belonging that you were just bringing up, that is at the core or at the heart of the relationship component. When I feel that I belong and I feel that I'm cared for, that I feel that I matter, that's when I feel that I'm going to give my best, right? Because there's empathy but so it was really heart-wrenching that she said to me, why bother with that? So with that in mind, Peter, I think we might be able to discuss this next point here, which is regarding, how do we then, if we are aware that belonging and relationships are at the core, how do we nurture that social emotional component? You were sort of mentioning that at one point. How do we foster that, look out for that? What does that, as Jill would have said on the last TED Talks, what does that sound like, feel like? What does that look like through Zoom or in the brick and mortar?
Well, it's funny. I mean, when you look, I was just listening to you when you talked about your daughter's example. And I think, especially for older kids, older students, when we see kids, I think that what this pandemic is sort of exacerbating is sort of this divide for when kids already felt a sense of agency, a sense of that they were already engaged. They already felt they had ownership of their learning, that when they switch to sort of virtual learning, they can still drive. I think they sort of still feel at the centerpiece of the work. They can advocate for themselves. They can reach out to their, professor or the teacher or, whatever level of schooling they're at, and they can really stay engaged and learn and grow. And I think what we're seeing is when kids don't feel that way, when they feel disengaged, when they feel disempowered, when they feel disenfranchised, when they feel like the curriculum isn't a part of them and they're not connected to the curriculum and to the learning, I think that it's easier for them to disengage and to be passive. And I think that one drawback of like this format of something like Zoom is that it can actually exacerbate passivity. And, I think being passive is sort of the enemy of what we want kids to be in school. We want kids to opt in, so to speak. We want to foster engagement. And so when I think of like kids' social development, kids' social needs, kids' social emotional needs, is sort of fundamental to that sense of agency and connection and eventual engagement. And so I think we have to tend to it. And we talked, at the outset, we've spent a lot of time talking about relationships. When we think of building kids' social emotional learning, a sense of connection is the foundation, I think, of any thoughtful work that we've sort of engaged in schools and districts around social emotional learning. And we recognize that kids, in relationships, are going to struggle, that actually they need to struggle, that they need to make mistakes in relationships, much like they would in a math lesson. Mistakes are part of how we learn to be with one another. I think the challenge is for schools to have a curriculum or have a way of supporting social development. So when kids make mistakes, they have skills to fall back on. They have ways to repair relationships. Kids come to school with all kinds of skills. But, some of the skills they have that might help them thrive at home or thrive in their neighborhood might get them in trouble in school. So it's not that they don't have schools. It's sort of learning sort of what skills work here in this strange environment when I'm with 30 other, 12-year-olds. Like, when am I ever in an environment with 30 other 12-year-olds? Well, I might need a certain set of skills to help me navigate being in a classroom or a school environment with this many students of my age. We're all trying to get the same thing. And then there's the other thing of what does literate academic discourse look and sound like? How do I engage in that? What is that? There's a vocabulary to that that's sometimes hidden from kids, and we want to make it explicit. We want to help kids. So this is how we're going to engage together. And these are the skills you might need to sort of do things like work collaboratively with a partner. How do you solve problems when kids are working together? How do we in a literacy lesson, for instance, as a teacher, do I give space for kids to talk about how it went when they worked with their partner today? What did they do well? What part of the work really did they feel like they were they did a good job with, and what parts do they think they didn't? Like, did one student do all the work? And do I use that as an opportunity to get somebody in trouble, or do I use that as an opportunity to say, well, what might tomorrow look like? Because, we can't have partnerships where one kid does all the work. It's not fair. It's not fair to anybody's learning. What happens when one person does all the talking? And so I think, like adults, I think many of our colleagues, we I wish they would learn that social skill as well. But we want kids to have the same, the skills that we want adults to have, and that allow them to thrive in school. And so, again, I think it's in my mind, it's being intentional in our school day that we're attending, that the social skills that kids are learning are as important as their academic skills, because I actually think they're fundamentally integrated and interdependent in ways that you can't do really one without. It's the same child, right? They sit down and their head and their heart, like they're all in front of you. And I don't know if I answered your question, but when I think about social development, I think a lot about sort of what both, as kids engage with each other in school and come to school to be their full selves, what are the ways in which the schools can support them to be that kind of person? And that, that means giving them support in the lessons and instruction themselves, but it also means having the kind of environment that's safe, that's supportive, that acknowledges who they are, the communities they come from, and what's of interest to them.
Their context, their interests, their strengths as well, and can, capitalize on that rather than, be the teacher who dictates, but allow that to develop also from the student. Sorry, Gabby, you were going to say something, yes?
No, I just, it keeps going through my mind is just how much do we really, when we're talking about the question, what are the essentials of teaching and learning? It's just, it really means reallocating time focused on skills and really just looking at content and curriculum as something that goes to the background, that maybe you allow less time for that and more time towards the skills. And then it's funny because we are scared of doing that, I think, sometimes in schools, because they feel like curriculum is everything, and we forget that the part of the skills and the social interactions and all of this are really the things that are going to keep them engaged and keep them as lifelong learners, which later on, it doesn't matter if you didn't maybe cover as much content as you used to do when you were, in the brick and mortar.
Yeah.
Is that something along those lines, Peter, would you say?
Yeah, I think that this is the tension. I think all teachers feel the tension between sort of, helping students develop the skills they need to be successful and covering the content they're held accountable for and the kids are held accountable for. And look, I think we would be remiss not to recognize that teachers are on, they have content sometimes they actually have to cover. And so it's not negotiable for them to just say, well, I'm going to put this in front of my curriculum. I think what I encourage folks how I encourage at least the teachers I work with to think about it is that you actually can't get through that curriculum if we don't do both. And so it's just a reimagining of how we might structure lessons and engagement with kids so that we can cover the content we need, but in a way that fosters agency, that fosters the development of skills kids need to thrive, and develops the kind of safety and connection that's sort of central to that. And so, I'll give you a couple examples. So, when I think about a lot of times what's happened, one of my big fears when I talk to curriculum directors when we went to virtual school in the pandemic is that instruction would become more didactic. It would become more a teacher talking and kids listening, when they had worked for years with building a curriculum where kids were constructing knowledge, where where lessons were about kids interacting, kids digging, kids sharing ideas, kids disagreeing about ideas and making things better because of the feedback that they've gotten. It was about that sort of interaction and engagement with the content. And that it is in that engagement that kids learned. It wasn't sitting passively to the teacher, sort of going through that. And the fear is that in the pandemic that we've had reverted in many places because it's easier to teach that way. It's easier for me just to set up my Zoom room. I can mute everybody if I have to, and I can get through the content. And the challenge, of course, is that in life, kids decide what gets learned. We might decide what gets covered. Correct. But kids decide what gets learned. We can't learn for them. And that sort of, that's the rub here, I think. And that's a hard thing for teachers to, I think, because it's disempowering a little bit. It feels a little disempowering because really the kid's in the driver's seat about what gets learned. And I think so. I think it's recognizing that and in structuring engagement, structuring lessons, so that the experience still builds on the things that help kids access and engage in the instruction, as opposed to being passive.
Peter, you're saying some really good stuff here. I wish that what powerful tools that teachers can come away with after listening to you, things that should be prioritized. It brings to mind also this very amazing toolkit that you guys have at Collaborative Classroom that we're going to make available to the audience today, right, Gabriela? This tool for reconnecting, for rebuilding, for guidance, these lessons that teachers can really get their hands on and put them into practice for the social emotional needs that we're discussing just now. So how would we do that, Gabriela?
Yes.
To download the Collaborative Classroom?
I think we're going to add it into the comments in a minute. I'll try to do that really fast. And whoever wants to, they can just download it from there.
Thank you
Give me
so
1 second,
much.
I'll find the link.
Now, I can just say a little bit about it as you're working, just because it is. We just wrote a blog series on some of these social emotional learning essentials, and the toolkit is something we developed over the summer that we want to give away to all the schools and districts that might think it's that might see it as something that's helpful to them. And it's really about we call it the Reconnecting and Rebuilding Toolkit, and it's really designed as a set of class meetings that teachers can use on a variety of topics. Some of the topics that are around, the stuff we talked about today, building relationships, coming together, connecting, but also some about how to handle a tragedy, how to handle loss. There are some class meetings in the kit on coming back to school from virtual school. So when schools reopen, hopefully many teachers are in the process at some point this year of finally greeting their students in person. But they're going to want some resources to help sort of bring kids back into the fold and help them come together and build their own relationships. So this isn't meant to be the only thing, obviously, that teachers use, but to be a set of resources that teachers might find really helpful as they work with students both virtually and in person in this really, really challenging school year. And so and there's also a blog series that folks can have access to on our website, collaborativeclassroom.org, that goes through all that well, and it has links to the toolkit as well. So there's lots of ways into it. It's free, and folks just need to download it if they want it.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think that's so
there
important.
It is. It's in the comment bar.
Excellent, Gabriela. Thank you so much. I know we've been told by our production team behind the scenes here that there's a large audience. We have a great viewing audience today. So you make the most of these tools, you guys, and certainly reach out to CCC, Center for Collaborative Classroom. And maybe, Peter, now you could leave us with some advice for those of us and for our viewing audience, those teachers or school leaders that want to foster these caring and nurturing environments and begin to foster these opportunities to consolidate and move forward with the relationship, with the belonging. How would we start to build a collaborative classroom?
Yeah.
What would that look like? What would that entail?
I've been thinking about really it's a balance between a lot of the things that we talked today and the intention with which we build them. I was with one of my mentors used to say, we do what we value. And so when you walk into a school, whether it's a virtual or you walk in person, you can see what they value by what they do, not necessarily by what they say, but really by what's happening. So we do what we value. And I think doing social emotional learning, sort of attending to students' sense of connection, doesn't mean abdicating our responsibility to help kids grow and learn academically. It is, I think, just fundamentally intertwined, as we've talked about today. And so when we think about it, and we work with our partner schools and districts, we want to make sure there's tangible, hard things kids are learning and engaged with, but we do it in the context where they can take risks. They feel safe to take risks. They have the skills they need. They have the sense of autonomy in their school day. They can choose some things, whether it's books to read or topics to write about, within a context of a curriculum that might be assigned, and they have that sense of connection, and they feel like they can do it. And then when those things are true, when they have a sense of autonomy, they have a sense of belonging, they have a sense of competence, that really engagement happens, and that we foster that agency that's so important to them. So, this is a delicate balance, but I think we do what we value, and I think that's really important in this hard time.
Well, those are great closing remarks, Peter. Thank you. It gives us a sense of direction as to where we can look towards our north. Also leaves us with great inspiration. And I love this, that when you talk about competence, and in closing, I'd just like to bring to our attention this metaphor of the mountain. There can be a tall mountain you mentioned during our conversation, but we need to have someone there who supports and encourages us, and not with empty language, but with our actions, as you said, not necessarily what we say, but what we do. Right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, and Andrea, it's important to mention, I think time was so short for all the things and for this amazing topic, but we're going to continue the conversation February 27th with our Leaders Forum, and it's in our calendar of events. So if anybody wants to continue this conversation, which I think is amazing, we'll be able to do so in this Leaders Forum, correct?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Thank you for inviting me today, and I'm looking forward to that forum.
Thanks, Gabby, for reminding us of the forum. It takes place once a month. We have school leaders from all over the world. We have people from Finland, from China. We have people in Africa, a lot of people from Colombia, and all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. And we share best practices, and we're guided by people like Peter, who through their experience can guide us in how we move forward and how we face our challenges. So thanks for that reminder. And with that, I guess it's time to say goodbye, Peter, all the way in California and in the Bay Area. Yes, Peter, big hug from Mexico. Big hug to the people at New EduLight in the audience. You've been amazing, everybody in the audience today. Thank you for following, and we hope you enjoyed our session today.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting me.